approval of minutes, and then the consideration of Senate Bill 363. So I think we have the minutes. Gary's emailed out the minutes from March 10th. Any discussion on the minutes? None. I'll ask for a motion on the minutes. Representative Hellwig.
I move we approve the March 10th minutes.
Second. Second from Representative Humphreys. All in favor of approving the March 10th meeting minutes, say aye. All opposed, no. Motion passes. Minutes are approved. Next item is to bring up for consideration Senate Bill 363. So we're just going to bring it up for discussion and amendments, and then after that, see if there's desire to have action on the bill. So to start, though, I'll ask the Office of Revisor Jenna to give a quick overview of the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Senate Bill 363 would make a number of amendments related to the Department of Health and Environment and DCF relating to continuous Medicaid eligibility, receipt of waiver services. There are some HR 1 requirements that are fulfilled in this bill, as well as cross-check different verifications for those individuals, and requiring redeterminations for certain individuals on a quarterly basis for those public assistance programs.
Okay, committee, any questions for the Revisor's Office? Seeing none, we'll open up discussion on the bill, and I'll start with, we had a lot of, we had 2 meetings, I think, right? We had an informational hearing on the bill, and then we also had the regular bill hearing. And through that, it seemed there was a little bit of a common thread on some of the concerns with the bill. So I think it was yesterday, today's Tuesday. So yesterday, I sat down with a few of the agencies and a few other people in the room, the revisers, research, and we kind of went through each section of the bill and tried to kind of smooth out some of the concerns. And I'd like to begin the discussion with offering an amendment, and we'll go through the amendment, and I'll also invite Christine Osterlin to come up and give her thoughts on kind of what the changes were, if she's willing. So, but if you don't mind, we'll just wait just about a couple minutes. We'll take a look at it and have Jenna go through it, and then we'll open that up.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. These changes begin on page 1 by striking subsection A of section 1, which is the requirement to seek an 1115 waiver relating to continuous Medicaid eligibility for certain individuals. And this would change that requirement that the KDHE would have to work with CMS to determine what waiver may allow for continuous eligibility as described in subsection B1, and the other goals set out in subsection B. The department would be required to keep a record of correspondence and documentation with the centers and report the results of that discussion or waiver application to the Bob Bethel Committee, this committee, the Welfare Committee, as well as the Senate Government Efficiency Committee or their successor committees. The next change would be on page 2 and in subsection B1, which would be line 3, and it would then read permit continuous. So this would be required that the state shall seek authority to permit continuous Medicaid eligibility for individuals described in subsection A, subject to discussions with CMS and that should be recorded in records of documentation from the center to confirm the contents of discussions that occurred, and then such records shall be kept and made available for inspection. The next change is to remove Section 2 in its entirety, which is on pages 2 and 3. The next change is on page 3, and this would be the different cross-checks required. It would remove the requirements in 4 and 5, which relate to the Department of Revenue quarterly checks and the Department of Labor semi-monthly checks related to employment and assets. Next change is on page 4, which relates to a notice of noncompliance or being disenrolled from food assistance or medical assistance. Changes that from just a 30-day notice to no greater than a 30-day notice to correspond to current requirements for that notice. Next change is on page 6. This relates to the requirement to no longer accept self-attestation of household income, no longer accept self-attestation for certain factors. This would strike on lines 4 and 5 household composition. So the department could still rely on a self-attestation of household composition. And the last changes are on page 22. Beginning in paragraph 6, it would strike except as provided in paragraph 8 and strike all of paragraph 8. And instead, this would just read that redeterminations of an individual's eligibility for medical assistance shall be conducted every 6 months, and then the paragraph shall take effect. So this redetermination of eligibility occurring every 6 months would only take effect upon approval being granted by CMS to seek removal of the caretaker medical population out of the Section 1115 waiver as defined in the Federal Social Security Act.
Thank you. Committee, any questions for Jen? And also just know that I think Christine will also come up and be available for questions as well. Representative Weichel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I suspect we'll have some robust discussion on this amendment, but a question for Jenna. So to clarify the changes on page 22, if this amendment were to go in effect, this would make every category of Medicaid eligibility subject to 6-month renewals pending approval of withdrawal from that waiver. Is that right?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will defer to someone from the agency for more details on that.
Yeah, so, anyway, I believe that's not the intention, but I'll welcome Christine Osterlin. Welcome. Thanks for being willing to come and help us through this.
Yeah, the intention of that language is it would limit the 6-month determination to just the caretaker medical population, which is our parents and legal guardians. But the reason for the language around removal from the waiver is right now, caretaker medical is in our 1115 waiver as a continuous eligibility population. And until we can get approval from CMS to remove them, which we are working with them because they have already notified us that we have to remove them, but I don't have a date certain of when that amendment to remove them from continuous eligibility will be approved. So the intent is it would be limited to that population.
My understanding correctly, it really doesn't change a whole lot in the bill. It just, instead of saying who's exempt, it just switches it to.
Well, it would change a lot because the way the bill came out of the Senate, while it did list HCBS populations, it did have certain populations listed. It left PACE subject to the quarterly. It left our Social Security disabled population. So there are a lot of populations that would have still been subject to the more frequent redeterminations. What we're trying to get to is just limiting those more frequent checks to the caretaker medical population.
And if the committee feels that additional language is necessary to clarify that, you can give me the discretion to do that if the bill were to pass out.
The language on that page 22,
So how I would word it is redetermination of the caretaker medical eligibility. I would just put caretaker in that first sentence and then follow it up with the timeline would be dependent upon CMS approval to remove from the 1115. You could just say redeterminations are completed every 6 months for the caretaker medical assistance population, period. This paragraph shall take effect, ...
Representative Humphries.
Have we moved on from this thing? Or, yeah, I mean, if we're still on that one,
Maybe what would be easier is if we just go back to the very beginning and Christina will walk through each change. And there's a lot of people involved in the discussion, but I think Christine has probably the most experience on a lot of these changes and some of the rules from CMS and what would be simpler for the agencies and I think effectively getting us where the bill is trying to go, but taking away some of the things which may add a lot of difficulty for an uncertain gain. So Christine, if you don't mind, just.
So section 1, so the way the bill was originally drafted, it required KDHE to submit an 1115 waiver. 1115 waivers are very, very time intensive to create and submit, but CMS had already informed the states in July of 2025 that they would not consider any new continuous eligibility waivers unless that population was in federal law or federal rule. HCBS, any type of HCBS is not in federal law or federal rule, so we felt like to go through the whole process and use state resources to submit a waiver that likely would be denied might be futile. And so what we came up with instead is that KDHE, by this language, will be directed to reach out to CMS, engage in discussions with them around would a waiver be considered and could it be approvable? If so, what would that waiver have to contain in order to get CMS's approval? Then we would report the results or the outcome of those conversations back to the legislature, and then the legislature could consider if anything would be allowed. They may come back with a flat no, nothing is allowed. They may come back and put some criteria or requirements on what we'd have to do that the legislature may or may not be in favor of, but that we would just engage in those conversations, get written confirmation from CMS of what potentially would be considered, if anything, and then report back.
Any questions on that first section? All right, thank you very much.
And then going on to section 2, there was a requirement here for some reporting. So both DCF and KDHE do some limited reporting around disenrollment and approval reasons. This language takes it a lot farther than either system is programmed to produce at this point. Plus, it just gets very complicated because someone could be denied for multiple reasons, so where do you report them? And there's also a fiscal tied to this additional reporting. And so in the meeting, I think we all agreed collectively that we would just stay with the reports as they are now, and we could, again, both agencies could look at could they be expanded in any way and then come back with a recommendation, but right now it would be stricken.
Thanks. Any questions on the section 2? Representative Weichel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This was actually the one part of the bill I really liked. So for Medicaid specific, I know this isn't for DCF, but for KDHE specifically, were the requirements in here more onerous than what you were required to report to CMS during the unwinding period?
Yes.
Okay. Can you give me your latest reports on what you have already?
Sure,
that you
yeah, we
referenced?
can give you the links because those reports are actually public, but
Okay.
yes, absolutely.
All right. I think, any further questions on section 2 and continue section 3?
Section 3, there were a couple changes. One is the removal of the Department of Revenue data matching. The reason is Department of Revenue is tax records. Tax records get out to date very quickly. Both DCF and KDHE use Kansas Department of Labor. I'm going to not do acronyms today. I'm going to try really hard. And as well as on the Medicaid side, we use a CMS hub, which is Equifax, and DCF has another income source as well. So these are like real time. These are much more frequent. They're updated quarterly, so it's the most current wage and earnings information available. And so we really felt like it's more important to use the most current data sources than using outdated data sources that may show that there's a conflict in income being reported when there's really not. And that does increase cost to the state because if KDOL, Kansas Department of Labor, is telling me they make $1,000, their tax return said they made $2,000, I'm now going to have a worker work that case when really the Kansas Department of Labor information is going to be the most current, is really what we should be using to make decisions of whether we need to contact the individual or not.
And am I correct that this the portion about the Department of Revenue checks, that carried a decent fiscal note
Yes.
along with it?
Yes, yeah.
That was one of the other reasons why we considered that as part of the amendment to remove it. Representative Meyer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm glad you brought that up. Can you tell us how much this subtracted from the overall fiscal impact?
We haven't looked at that yet. We literally met yesterday morning, but we're starting to go through and we'll make updates to the fiscal note based on these changes.
Okay. But Mr. Chair, you said that it is making a significant decrease to the fiscal impact.
Thank you. That's what I remember from the informational hearing and also the bill hearing, is that the efforts put into the frequent checks with the Department of Revenue did cause a lot of additional work and cost.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it.
And then the next change in this section is really, it's, if you look above in paren 2, there's a quarterly check with the Department of Labor, and then in 6, it was a semi-monthly. Both agencies actually do checks with Kansas Department of Labor more frequently, so our recommendation was to kind of delete number 6 and just go with the requirement of at least quarterly. Both agencies do it more frequently, but we don't have direction that says quarterly and semi-annually. All right. Moving on to the top of page 4, the last change in section 3 is both KDHE and DCF. When we get to the point that we're doing a final notice to a member that their eligibility is ending, both of us have timeframes much shorter than 30 days today. So we're adding the language no greater than 30 days. KDHE, for example, is 10 days. So that will allow us to keep our current process in place, and yet by adding that verbiage, we'll still be in compliance. All right. The next change is, let me see if I can keep my section straight here, is in self-attestation. My copy, it's on page 6, lines a little bit of 4 and a little bit of 5. This is striking household composition from the not being able to accept self-attestation. We've had, obviously, even here in committee, some conversations that many of our caretaker medical population in Medicaid make below the threshold to have to file tax returns. And so if we don't have a tax return, there's really not a way to verify household composition. So collectively, we decided we would remove that, but keep the other language in there around self-attestation. So we would not accept it for income, which neither of us do today. We would not accept it for residency, age, caretaker relative status, or the receipt of other coverage. Self-attestation would no longer be allowed for those areas.
Representative Humphries?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So that's my question. It's not exactly on the amendment, but it called to mind this question of residency. Is that like a specific address, or is that just a resident of Sedgwick County, for instance? What is the definition of residency?
So for Medicaid, I can't speak for DCF, but I know Dr. Whiteside Hicks is here. Residency is very loose in the Medicaid world. I'm just really going to be frank about that. But what we would accept for residency would be like a driver's license, a piece of mail that shows that you're receiving mail at a particular address that shows that you reside in Kansas. Really isn't dependent on county. We would check the National Change of Address database to make sure that you haven't reported a change of address that would put you out of state. But those would be really the documents that we would accept, maybe school forms that would have the parent's address.
So are you saying residency means address?
Yes. In most of the time. Now, in Medicaid, it gets complicated. So Medicaid allows you to move out of state, and you can reside there for 6 months, 9 months. Maybe I'm taking care of a family member. I might be going to college. But if my intent is to return to the state of Kansas, I cannot in their eligibility because they're still considered a resident of Kansas.
Okay, a little vague, I guess, yeah.
It is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that answer. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yep. We have Representative Owsley?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And maybe it was DCF, but if I recall correctly, the income self-attestation was kind of a pilot program right now. That was something, and I might be remembering wrong.
Yeah, both of us currently today, both agencies do not accept self-attestation of income. We verify what's being reported against Kansas Department of Labor or another income source. We use on the Medicaid side, the hub, which is Equifax data. So we do not accept self-attestation of income. We will verify it.
That's a fairly new process.
I think what you're thinking of is it's actually around residency. We are working on, actually just fun update. We've been working for a while now with Gainwell and working with the states of Missouri, Oklahoma, Colorado, and Arkansas because Gainwell operates in all those states and they have access to all of their member information, where we will do a pilot project where, for instance, if someone applies for Medicaid in Kansas, we could do a bump up against their data to see, do they have open Medicaid in one of those states? We're going to do a pilot to see how many successful hits, if you will. I'm not sure what the right word or information that we get back to see if it would be worth it. Because obviously, if we made this a permanent process, there would be a cost to it. So we're going to do a pilot so we can report back to the legislature if it's successful or not. And then if it is, we would come with an ask to be able to implement it. And then the last change is on the top of page, starts on the page, top of page 22, but this is the language we just talked about, which the intent of what we're trying to do here is, instead of trying to list out every population that is not subject to the every 6-month redetermination, but to make it state the population that would be subject to it, which is our caretaker medical population. What that means in non-eligibility speak is they are our parents or legal guardians of a child who is enrolled in Medicaid. It would be that population that would be subject to by the way this amendment reads, every 6-month redetermination. This is the group that is, their federal poverty level is 38% or below.
Representative Owsley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And on that one, what's the federal allowance or requirement currently? Is it 6 months also?
No, so this gets a little in the weeds. So per the Code of Federal Regulations, we can only do a renewal. There's a difference between a renewal and a redetermination. We can only do a renewal one time a year. And a renewal is a full check of eligibility. I'm checking income, assets, residency, citizenship, all the requirements of Medicaid or CHIP enrollment. I can only, by federal regulation, do that once a year. What I can do more frequently, which is what a redetermination is I can do minimal data checks. Now, again, it's not fully defined with CMS of what that is. When they say minimal, is that 1 data check? Is that 2 data checks? But we could do a minimal income data check in between that 1 year. In this amendment, it would be every 6 months. We would do a bump up against our income sources to see, are they indicating that your income has changed and you're no longer eligible? And if that appears that way, we would still have to send notice to the member to have them verify whether that information from the data source was correct or not.
Thank you, Matt. Mr. Chair.
I think that was the last change. So committee, any questions? Representative Meyer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for your thorough explanation and for working with people on the committee to get this kind of cleaned up. This is kind of related back to my question about the fiscal note, but would this amendment help prevent us falling out of compliance and being required to pay back the federal match?
So it will increase workload. So the amendment doesn't completely eliminate that risk, but it does lower that risk because we now have reduced the population that would be subject to redeterminations to just caretaker medical. That's around 35 to 37,000 individuals, and it goes from every quarter to every 6 months. So both of those would help, but would there still be some risk? Yes, to the timeline, but it's better.
Is there anything further you could recommend to ensure that we are doing this a little bit more safely and make sure that there are not any bigger risks that we're maybe not seeing right now, or could work through to ensure that y'all won't fall out of compliance, we aren't paying a lot of money?
I think the biggest thing will be as we revise our fiscal note is making sure that we get the FTEs that we'll be asking for. So as we notify members that it is possible that they no longer meet eligibility requirements, that when that information comes back in, we can act on it immediately because we are adding time by sending notice. And yes, and so that would be my ask, is that as we revise our estimate that we get funded the FTEs to ensure we stay compliant with timeliness.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Roser.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. With all the changes made here in this amendment, can you tell us a little bit about the changes for staffing requirements on your end for what this would look like?
We're just starting to look at that. It does, we were estimating, I believe, I probably shouldn't do this off memory, I think it was 20 FTEs is what we had on the previous version. Since we're going to every 6 months and limited to caretaker medical, that number is going to come down. I don't want to venture a guess here, but it will be less than our original estimate because of the fact that we've limited populations and increased timelines.
Can I ask another question? My second question would be, what happens if we don't fund it, the need for more staff? Where would you get the money from to do that? Or how are you going to make it happen?
Well, I think there's 2 possible answers to that. One would be I would have to obviously check with our legal department, is it an unfunded mandate at that point, and what does that mean? The reality is if I try to do this on existing staff. And as I shared with this committee, we already run, like today, for instance, we had 950 cases today that are over the 45-day timeline with the federal government. They always give you a little bit of wiggle room. If I don't get the staffing and that number starts to bump up to 1,200, 1,500, then we're going to go back on a cap. And again, for those that maybe weren't here back in 2018, 2019, when the clearinghouse was in a backlog, it was a mess. And we were on a cap because of what was in HR 1. When you get a perm audit now, and we talked about this a little bit last week, our perm audit, because of our untimeliness back then, our error rate was over 20%. Now, according to HR 1, if we would have those kind of findings again, CMS cannot waive our penalties. So what happens when you're untimely and you get a perm finding, let's say your perm error rate, we'll just use the 20%, they're going to calculate that across your entire Medicaid population. That's your error rate, and how much, then they say, then you owe us all the federal money back, so 62% based on that error rate. And it will come out to be millions of dollars. So that's the risk if you don't fund the FTEs. If we go forward and we get into a backlog, Kansas will at some point have to pay. It's not as cut and dried as what was in there related to SNAP because it was a set amount. It would just be what is our perm error rate, and anything above 3%, we would have to pay the federal dollars back.
Okay, thank you, Christine. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Carr?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And you answered several of my questions with my previous colleague. However, to kind of expand on that, I understand there's been some difficulty in the past with respect to acquiring FTEs. So if this legislation passes, what do we have as a plan to obtain the additional FTEs? And if this is funded, do we have an additional plan to bump up wages? Because as I understand, it's sort of a wage situation with respect to not being able to acquire those FTEs. Has it been too short of a time to look at that, or have we considered that as of yet? Certainly keeping in mind what the adverse ramifications of that will be if we are unable to meet the error rate.
Yeah, so we right now on the Medicaid side, we do run about a 10% vacancy for eligibility workers. So again, that's why we run about 900 to 1,000 cases behind routinely, just because we can't fill every position. So yes, it does put additional risk. We have been talking about, again, how do we attract more workers? One of the things that we've done is we do have some workers that are working remote. I mean, the great thing about eligibility is I have a system. I can tell what you're doing any minute of the day. So it isn't it isn't one of those jobs that if you're working remote that you may be goofing off, because I know exactly what you're doing at any given moment. I know what case you're in. But what that's allowed us to do is it has allowed us to attract a lot of employees out of Western Kansas. We have about 20 people now that work in Western Kansas that actually do really good work for us. So that has opened up some avenues. They all have to reside in Kansas. We may have to look at expanding that. We have just a small group that works remote today. That might be an option for us to lower that vacancy rate. We've looked at things around hours. We don't right now have any part-time eligibility workers, but is that a possibility where you might attract college students, or you might attract a single mom who's got children in school, so could work during the school hours, but then would need to be available after school. So yeah, there's a lot of things that we're kind of discussing to help us lower our vacancy rate. But yes, it is a risk. Anytime you increase workload and you run a vacancy rate, there's a risk there.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Sanders?
That was pretty much my question. It doesn't seem to me to make any sense to fund more FTEs if we can't fill the positions we have now. Is 10% behind pretty typical, or is that more than usual or less than usual, or?
It's going down. We're actually trending in the right direction, but a lot of that, I'll give credit to the legislature. The raises last year on the Medicaid side, I can't speak for DCF, but our eligibility workers were the workers that got the larger bump. I think it was 10%, if my memory is right, or maybe 15. So that has actually helped a lot. We used to run about 14, 15%, so we're seeing the trend down because wages went up. And we think that's a real positive movement. And we'll have our next report out, gosh, we're almost to the end of March. So first part of April, I'll have my next quarterly report, and we may see it go down even further.
Representative Meyer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks again. So I can't totally recall if I asked this last time or not, but is there anything that is preventing you all from being able to enact the provisions of HR1 right now without this bill? Or does this bill just kind of complicate things? Because it seems like we're trying to put a lot of things into action and then also fix them, but also you're a very competent agency, so it feels, I feel like you would be able to manage this without the need for these provisions in the bill. How would you say your thoughts are on that?
So the items in this bill that are required by federal law, absolutely, we have to do them regardless. I guess you could say it aligns it, but it really is, unnecessary. I think the risk that this puts in for Kansas, and it is just a risk, we are not required to do more frequent redeterminations per HR1. That was specific to the Medicaid expansion population only. By us requiring more frequent eligibility checks, I would say timeliness is our biggest risk. And again, kind of some of the things that we've talked about, we do run a vacancy rate. We already do have cases over 45 days, so it will introduce risk. This amendment moves us definitely in the right direction, but yes, it is introducing risk that is not required.
Oh, sorry, Representative Sappington.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So in regard to, going back to, I guess, the workforce question, and thinking about the eligibility workers and the type of work they're doing with just massive data management, have you considered incorporating AI into any of this process?
Yes. We're actually, we're getting ready to reissue our RFP for our eligibility vendors. So on the Medicaid side, our family medical, which is where caretaker medical sits, is actually done by a contractor. It's Conduent. It is time to re-procure that contract. And one of the things that, yes, that we are putting in there is a lot more technology requirements. The other thing that we are looking at, and we will probably have an ask next session from the legislature, is we've had some other states that have successfully introduced AI to register cases. And I know we've talked about a lot of times here, our applications are like 32 pages long. There's starting to be proven technology. We let a few other states go in front of us and make some mistakes and learn from their mistakes and perfect it. But they are now successfully using AI to enter all that information from an application directly into the system, so you're not having a worker trying to either click buttons or physically type addresses, which of course is going to be much more error prone than what AI could do. So yes, we are definitely, we actually have an AI roadmap of where we'd like to get to. Just some of the areas, I would say it's a little unproven yet, but I think there's a couple strong areas.
Thank you.
Thanks, and Representative Weichel. Okay, we're good. All right, well, thank you very much for your time. Thanks for being willing to walk us through that and some of the technical parts of the changes. So any further clarifications? I think we're there on the amendment. So I'll move my amendment and ask for a second. Is there a second on the amendment? Representative Sanders with the second. Any discussion on the amendment? Representative Weichel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I mean, I think that perhaps in some way this amendment is a mixed bag, but I don't think overall it makes the bill anywhere where I could support it. I do want to just reiterate that to the point that Representative Meyer made earlier about HR 1 and what is here and what is not, is that the majority of the Medicaid provisions in this bill were not in HR 1. And in fact, when Congress did HR 1, they specifically left out all of the populations we cover in Kansas because it only addressed the Medicaid expansion population. Congress decided all the populations we cover in Kansas should be left alone. But here we are attacking them, literally. So I just want to really reiterate, the parent caretaker population that is left in terms of the amendment on page 22 of who would have more frequent redeterminations than they currently do. In order to be eligible for Medicaid under that category in Kansas, you have to be a parent with a dependent child at home, so not a grown child, not a child in custody somewhere else, not a child in foster care. Your child has to be in your home as your dependent. And this is the income level at which you're eligible. For a parent with one child, you cannot make more than $685.27 a month or $8,223 a year. For a family of 3, it's $10,381 a year, which is $865 a month. I'll leave it there. I could keep going for the family size. The point is, the parents that are eligible for Medicaid under our current eligibility system are literally the parents who are struggling the very most to meet the needs of their families and their children. These are primarily mothers. They're mothers who may be leaving domestic violence situations and starting out on their own for their first time. They are mothers who are just trying to make ends meet when maybe another parent has disappeared or is not around or not fulfilling their obligations. These are Kansans who are struggling the most. And this bill is sitting here saying that this is who we should be making it harder for. And I don't care if we're talking about quarterly redeterminations or semi-annual redeterminations, all of this makes it harder for people. And I just don't understand why we want to spend state dollars to make it harder for this population to access health care. We can't fill the jobs we have now. It's going to require more jobs. We're going to get behind in our processing. We're going to have another backlog at the clearinghouse. And because of HR 1, that backlog is now going to cost us tens of millions of dollars down the line. I just can't support, I obviously can't support the bill. I don't think that's a big surprise to anyone. But I just want people to understand who we're talking about. We are not talking about, quote, childless adults who are just sitting around on their couch. We are talking about the very poorest parents in this state. That is who we are making life harder for with this bill. And I'll leave it there for now. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, further discussion on the amendment. And on that, I think it's one where those limitations on income, those are set by federal law, and we are checking those, correct? And I think it's just with the efforts we're doing, walking through the process, just making sure people abide by what the limitations are. Representative Weigel.
I don't think there has been any proof provided to this committee that the people who are eligible under these very strict guidelines aren't abiding by the law. We had nothing brought before us that showed cases of fraud. We had one proponent from a national organization who claimed this must happen because surely it must happen. And that was the extent of the proof brought before this committee. We had, I didn't count them, probably 30 to 40, maybe 50 testimonies from Kansas organizations asking us not to do this. So I can't agree that this is to make sure people are following the law. We have zero reason to believe people aren't following the law. And we have one of the most restrictive eligibility in the state, in the country for this parent caretaker eligibility. I'll leave it there. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Meyer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to wholly agree with my colleague. We both work in this field and we see how this affects families every day, and we see how it affects our agencies and how it affects our nonprofits and our churches who are trying to help individuals who are in this situation. And, you know, while of course this amendment tries to help put some guardrails on it and address the issues, I just can't imagine that it's a good idea to spend millions of dollars to try to enact legislation that literally the amount of money that we're going to be spending on or potentially spending on fines from the federal government and FTEs is going to far outweigh the amount of money that the state ever spends on this very specific population. So to me, it just doesn't even make sense when you weigh it in that way as well, whether or not you know, you agree with the proposal or not. If we're talking about fiscal sanity and soundness for the state, this just does not check out. And so I would like our members who may not really fully agree with us or understand our concerns about targeting this specific population in this way to really consider the financial implications that this could have on our state as a whole and our agencies who are working to provide these services and stay in compliance.
Further discussion on the amendment? Representative Owsley, and I'd ask that we keep the discussion on the amendment and, yep, thank you.
I respect that. And I think it is, as we're talking about the eligibility and the 38% of federal poverty level. And I understand the federal poverty level is the federal poverty level, but is the 38%, is that state set eligibility or is that federally set? And I for anybody.
Yeah, Christine, if you are willing to, while Jenna's looking it up, that's fine. Thank you.
So states are required to cover the caretaker medical population. And in that mandatory coverage, there is the requirement that it has to at least be, you can't go below the current threshold of 38% of the federal poverty level. But that doesn't preclude the state of saying, I want to cover this caretaker medical population, but I want to do it at 50% or I want to do it at 75%. It's just, we're at the floor, but there are options to go above that.
Okay, thank you, Christine. Yes, any further discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, I'll close on my amendment. All those in favor of the amendment, say aye. Aye. All opposed, no. No. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. Amendment passes. So back on the bill as amended. Any discussion, amendments? Representative Carr.
I would like my no vote recorded, please.
So Representative Carr would like his no vote recorded on the amendment. Very good. Any further discussion? Representative Sappington.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I would like maybe some clarification because as I understood it from testimony last week, DCF had the bulk of the FTE impact. And so as the bill is amended now, would DCF still be, like what would their FTE impact be even with this? Because just KDHE spoke to the amendment.
Yeah. Correct? Yeah. I think I might be able to answer your question, so you let me know if I don't. So I think the same general checks and parts of the bill that were amended affect both agencies for the most part. And I think they will be working on a new fiscal note if the bill passes as amended out of committee. But I think a lot of the same quarterly checks with the Department of Revenue and some of the other elements that would cause an additional cost for KDHE would also cause a similar additional cost for DCF. So my belief is that the amendment will reduce the fiscal note for both agencies.
Thank you for that clarification.
Yep. Representative Owsley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I do appreciate your effort. You know, when you give me the heads up on this, I said I appreciate it. I wasn't sure I was going to be able to support it. And it sounds like we've hit a lot of the larger obstacles in the bill for the agencies, but I still don't see a cost-benefit analysis, a risk-benefit analysis, a need for this. And it seems like even with the amendment on there, this is still just a bad idea and has the potential to self-inflict a lot of damage, not only to Kansans, but to the state as a whole. So I'd still be a no vote, but I just wanted to say thank you on the record.
Representative Meyer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would agree with my ranking here. You know, this bill as a whole just opens up too many issues and seems incredibly unnecessary. And I would be quite interested to see the cost and risk benefit analysis, especially focusing on how much the agencies spend on offering these benefits to individuals versus how much we could potentially have to pay out of pocket to the feds and FTE costs, and really how that would affect our budget as a whole. You know, this was a good try on the amendment, and I appreciate that you offered this to try to rail it in a little bit. But I think that this whole bill is wrought with issues and puts us out of compliance with the federal government in ways that I don't think we've really had to experience recently. And we should definitely be considering that as we move forward on this bill. So I would hope that everyone on this committee take that into consideration when we put this up for a vote, and vote this down, please, because this is just going to cost way too much money for the state. Thank you.
Representative Carr.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Not mentioning the obvious other issues contained in this particular piece of legislation. We were elected to do a job, you know, and the major portion of our job is fiscal responsibility. We have no idea. We don't have a fiscal note. We don't have a cost analysis. We don't even have a pathway of which to obtain the additional employees that are going to be required. And that number is yet in the same situation as the single proponent of this bill. It looks like the Easter Bunny. We just have absolutely no idea. And, you know, I can appreciate, you know, the amendment that was offered, and I can also, you know, appreciate, you know, possibly the underlying foundational thought that this bill was worth introducing. But for what it is that we have been entrusted to do by those people that elected us, you know, we're failing miserably. There's a ton of questions we can't even answer. We have no idea. And if this, you know, is something that that we move forward with, I would at least say that until we get some of those other questions answered and we know what we're looking at based on what this might mean to us as a state financially, that we at least table this until we get that information at a later date. So with that, I'll make a motion that we table this until we get the other information.
So we have a motion to table. We have a second by Representative Owsley. This is a non-debatable motion. All those in favor of tabling the bill, say aye. Aye. All opposed, no. No. The noes appear to have it. The noes do have it. We're still back on the bill as amended. Any further discussion on the bill? Representative Helwig.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to say, appreciate the amendments that were put to this bill to make it better. And the reason that I think we do need this, even though we're not a Medicaid expansion state. This was to drive down errors. And getting rid of self-attestation is one of those ways. And we heard through the OIG on the Medicaid, when he did his review, they found that we had 50-plus-year-old women that were pregnant on Medicaid. So I believe these are just some checks that, even though we're not a Medicaid expansion state, I think they're good checks. And we pay 40% of all the Medicaid costs as a state. So I think these, and with the SNAP error rates, I think these will benefit Kansas in the long run. So just thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Weichel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In response to my colleague who just made those remarks, I think we've heard from both agencies that their error rate are coming down. That at KDHE, their last poll or data run on the error rate, it was under 1%. So I don't think there's a case that we need this to bring down error rates. At DCF, we've heard that they've implemented interim redeterminations. They've made other changes around utility expenses and shelter expenses, and their error rate is coming down based on the changes they've done. So I cannot agree with the assessment that we need this bill for any reason, let alone to bring down error rates when our agencies are already doing it. And then I'll say, I think, there's been a lot of discussion today that on the Medicaid side, a lot of the provisions that are left with the amendment pertain to the parent caretaker group. And I don't want people to think that means that they don't also affect children, because those parents have children in their home. And when parents can't access the health care they need, it's not good for the family unit. It's not good for their children, right? Like, it is harmful to other people. It is, when we do more frequent redeterminations, we are going to see more churn where eligible people lose coverage at that redetermination because they missed the mail, they didn't open their mail in time, or whatever it may be, and then they're going to reapply. It's going to cause more paper backlog. It's going to cause more backlog at the clearinghouse, and then we're right back where we were with, CMS fines. Although the difference when it happens next time is going to be that Congress told HHS they can no longer waive those fines in H.R. 1. So the difference is going to be when we find ourselves in that bad situation in 3 years or 2 years or however long it takes, we're going to owe a lot of money. And it's going to be because we did this here this year. And I just strongly urge people, one more thing. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for your indulgence. I've been trying to wrap my head around why legislators in this building want to vote on a law that codifies H.R. 1 provisions. There are provisions in here that say veterans are no longer eligible for exemptions from work requirements for SNAP, which means veterans in Kansas are losing their SNAP benefits because of H.R. 1. And when we vote on this on the floor, that's exactly what everybody who votes yes will be voting to say, I agree with that. And I just can't frankly understand why people want to do that.
Representative Humphreys.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Couple things. I do commend our agencies because we do know that the error rates are coming down, and I agree wholeheartedly, and I think they've done a great job. I think part of that is due to this committee over the last few years that we have put things in place, accountability in place. I think it's because the federal government has put accountability in place. Not that they weren't trying before, but when there are specific things that they're requested to do, that helps. And our error rates are going down, and I think part of it has been because of pressure from the state and from the federal government. And that's just a human nature. That's just the way things go. And so I commend the chairman, this committee, because I do think that we've done good work in the last few years. And then the other thing I would say is we've heard a lot of doomsday predictions in this committee over the last few years because of things that we put in place, and they haven't happened. And I think when we encourage people to work, we've had this discussion every year. work is a good thing. And when we encourage people to work, it is good for their families. It's good for their self-esteem. It's good for their children. It's good for everybody. And so I don't think the doomsday that we're hearing is actually going to happen. And of course, I don't want to hurt our veterans. I don't want to hurt people. I want to help. But I think we have different ideas on what is helpful and what is hurtful. And so my motives in this are to make Kansas a better state, to help people, to help our error rates go down, to do this together so that we have a safety net for the truly vulnerable. And that's what we're trying to do. And so with that, I would just say I do appreciate this bill, and I'll be voting yes on it. Thank you.
Representative, yeah, it's one of, I was looking back over the 4 years on welfare reform. That was one of my favorite informational hearings, was when we heard some of the success stories from the employment and training program efforts to help people, whatever their situation was with the employment and training programs, kind of get back on their feet and get a very well-paying job. And they were great stories. That was definitely the intention behind some of the bills we passed over the years, and I think as well as some of the components of this one. Representative Carr.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have more of just a statement. It's awful rich of us to say that the doomsday never happened when it was never affecting us in the first place.
Would you like to? Representative Humphries.
The doomsday wasn't on me personally. It was on the state. And we didn't hear the stories. So, the doomsday wasn't about me personally whatsoever. So just to make that clear.
Let's try to stay on the bill. Any further discussion on the bill? Representative Roser.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't know. I feel like I've been really quiet this session on this committee, which is not typical of a 24-year-old girl. That being said, I'm just really struggling to wrap my head around this bill because the population that it affects is the population that I was a part of. I had a mom who made that, less than $8,000 a year, and I was the kid on Medicaid. And so I bought the glasses at the Walmart that were $10 with the plastic purple frames that my lenses don't fit in. I'm really struggling. In regards to the veterans, I did have an amendment that was drafted to page 22, section 8, which talks about the exemptions for individuals in the redeterminations, and the amendment brought by the chair that changes that process completely. So it says who we are going to recertify instead of who we would exempt from recertifications. And so I did have an amendment drafted that an individual who served in the active military, naval, air, or space service, including those groups and individuals listed under 38 CFR 3.7, and who was discharged or released there from under an honorable discharge or general discharge under honorable conditions as an exemption. And so when we're talking about veterans, that was on the precipice of my mind and my heart to prioritize, especially legislating or representing an area so close to Fort Riley. That being said, just with the amount of attention on this bill from stakeholders in my community and the community adjacent to mine, District 66, I can't support the bill. I think the timing of it is difficult. We're on the last day to do so, and we don't have an updated fiscal note from the Division of the Budget. And I can understand passing it out of committee and hoping to get one before this gets above the line on general orders, but a properly vetted bill is a properly vetted bill. And I would need, based off of what I did in agriculture committee yesterday and where we're at with this, I I would need that to be comfortable to pass this out of committee. I'm a one vote on a committee of, what, 13? And so it would take 2 other Republicans to vote against the bill with me for it to stay here. And I'm not anticipating that by any means, but as for me in my district, I will be voting against SB 363. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Keep in mind on the fiscal note, we do have a fiscal note on the original bill, and we do know that from the hearing, so where a lot of the cost was generated, and we do know that the amendment reduced that cost more than likely significantly. So we don't know down to the penny, but we never know down to the penny, and most people could argue every single fiscal note that we see on the bill. So there's already a lot of inconsistency, but anyway, we do have a general ballpark on the direction of the fiscal note. So Representative Esau.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I echo a lot of what my previous colleague just said. For me, this isn't, I don't think we are attacking people in considering tightening things up to make sure that we're providing services to those who are qualified because of their circumstances, but I also don't think we should be making it so difficult that they struggle to meet the requirements and prove it. And so I hesitate. I think the amendment has made the bill significantly less burdensome for most folks, and I definitely like the amendments that are on here overall. I'm a little concerned about putting the 6 months in simply because I'm concerned about us increasing the error rate if we can't increase the staffing, and I don't know if we'll have the funds available to increase the staff. And so I'm hesitant of where I'm at on this bill just because of that. And I would rather us have a couple of meetings somehow over the next 6 months to look at if we put these into place, what kind of impact it has to our budget overall, because we keep looking for places to cut instead of spend more. And if we're going to add staff, we're going to spend more. I don't know if we're going to save enough overall to make it worth adding the staff. So I have reservations, and I don't know how I'm going to vote on the bill overall if and when it gets to the floor. I know the intent is good here, so I just wanted to say that I don't fault those who are concerned about the impact that the bill has, but I also don't fault those who are putting this in place because they're trying to look out for the taxpayer, who I think has equal standing here because the taxpayer is the one that's funding all of these, and I don't think we should ignore their concerns either, that their money is possibly not being spent on who it's intended to be spent on, and the checks and balances are how we know that. So I know I'm rambling, but that's where I'm at on this bill too. I've wavered both ways on it. It has weighed heavy on my heart, so just thought I would share that.
Any further discussion? Representative Owsley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I recognize intentions. And as we sit here and we discuss FTEs and making sure that there's no fraud in our Medicaid system, I'll remind the committee, currently in the budget bill, there's 6 FTEs for the OIG to chase down Medicaid fraud. We don't need this bill today. If we don't do this today and we were to look at it over the interim, we could come back with a better product that's more agreeable to all parties and maybe with a better risk-benefit analysis. But as I'm going through this bill, and it's 26 pages, we went over 6 pages of amendments. I'm reminded of the HOPE Act, and the HOPE Act had good intentions. But for those that serve on this committee and also on the Child Welfare Committee, what we saw after the HOPE Act passed and was fully implemented was an increase in kids in foster care. The Child Welfare Task Force that met in 2018, 2017, the number one recommendation that came out of there, out of 4 different working groups with 4 different factions of people, was to expand Medicaid, because they knew health care provided for healthy families, and healthy families are more functional. And if we place more restrictions upon people to get their health care, they're likely not to keep up with the requirements that are now Kansas imposed, not federally imposed. So I think of the intentions here, and I worry about the consequences that we can face in the future. And having that overlap of the Welfare Reform Committee and the Child Welfare Committee, I think is relevant here, because what we do here today in this committee will impact that committee tomorrow. And I just want you all to think about that as we close the conversation on this.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, is there a motion on the bill? Representative Humphries?
I move that the committee passes Senate Bill 363 favorably out of committee as amended.
We have a motion. Do we have a second? Representative Helwig with a second. Any further discussion? Representative Helwig with the second. Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor of passing the bill as amended, say aye. Aye. All opposed, no. No. The ayes appear to have it. Division's been called. All those in favor of the bill passing, please raise your hand. Chair votes aye. That's 7 aye. All opposed, no. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. With a vote of 7 to 6, the bill passes out of committee. Thank you, committee, for your. Yes, maybe.
Roger.
Sure. Representative Howes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Was this changed enough to need a substitute, or was the amendment fine with as amended?
That is a decision that's up to the committee. If it were, taking out 4 or 5 sections, I might recommend a substitute. But if the committee is fine with it showing the markup, the work that the committee has done, I can do as a committee report, or if you want it to look all fresh and brand new, I can prepare it as a substitute.
So my recommendation is just leave it as is, because I think it just shows the progress of the bill. Sometimes with a substitute bill, it's more of a complete change in the context, whereas this is, this kind of flows with what the Senate sent over. So I think we're okay as is. Representative Weichel. Representative Weichel would like her no vote recorded. Representative Meyer would like her no vote recorded. Representative Carr and Owsley as well. It's Carr, Owsley, Meyer, and Weichel. Well, committee, thank you very much. This is our last meeting that I'm aware of, and appreciate your enjoyable work this past year, and look forward to working with you on the floor. And with that, we're adjourned.